The Hunter x Hunter manga is ugly. Togashi can't draw to save his life. There are so many damn words, he should have just wrote a book. This series is carried by Madhouse's anime adaptation. Why is Togashi always on hiatus if his art is just scribbles? This is just a small sample of statements I have seen across the internet over my many years of being a Hunter x Hunter fan. A lot of people are convinced this manga has terrible artwork. I have always had immense love for this series, but even so, there was a time in the past where I found myself agreeing with a lot of these negative viewpoints. But now, I firmly believe it's among the most impressively made manga I have ever personally seen, specifically from an artistic standpoint. And I know, that's a pretty big sweeping statement, but in this video I will explain exactly why I believe this to be the case. So, what even makes good manga art? Isn't art ultimately a subjective thing? Something that looks ugly to one person could look beautiful to another person, right? Well, yeah, that's undeniably true, but even if that's the case, there is a certain standard in place specifically when it comes to assessing the artistic quality of manga. There are several aspects of manga art that are commonly recognized as vital components of the overall product, like different metrics used to assess and compare the artwork of different manga. There is no set style for drawing manga, but there are commonalities between every single manga out there in terms of their fundamental elements. For a piece of art to be considered manga, it must be composed as a sequence of panels and images. Generally, manga or even just comics as a whole is a combination of drawings and text. The medium has evolved drastically since Sazai-san and Astro Boy emerged in the late 40s and early 50s as some of the first serialized manga, but the foundational elements have never changed. Manga is made up of various components that work together to provide a fluid and immersive reading experience, and there is so much that goes into just a single chapter, even just a single page. Formatting or page structure, typesetting, paneling, composition, these are just a few examples of the essential elements that distinguish manga as a medium from others. On top of that, there are commonly used drawing techniques such as screen tone, expressive speech bubbles, speed lines, and abstract background effects. Margins as well as the shapes and sizes of panels are also incredibly important as they are crucial to forming the manner in which the reader's eyes track across the pages. The most important thing to remember about manga as opposed to typical forms of artwork is that this is a storytelling medium. It can definitely provide aesthetic value and be visually appealing to the eyes in tandem with the story it is telling, but the number one thing all mangaka should strive to accomplish is a fluid reading experience. A manga should be made to be read easily, without any confusion about the order of the sequence. Good manga art should flow effortlessly. Though, of course, there are examples of fantastic pages that break this rule and have no real sense of flow. Take this spread from Naruto as an example. Manga is read from right to left. This page is pretty confusing to the eyes because of the panel's varying shapes, sizes, and alignments. It is incredibly chaotic. Your eyes are immediately drawn to the center of the page because of how it is formatted, with much larger panels in the center. You can't tell whether you should read the smaller panels on the right vertically or go from right to left. But that's fitting. The chaos of this page's composition reflects the intensity and high-speed battle it is presenting to the reader. The speed lines in every single panel substantiates this. It doesn't really matter which direction you read this page because there's no text and all the panels work together in unison to display this high-speed exchange of shurikens between Sasuke and Itachi. You can start reading this page from the bottom left and end on the top right, and you'll still get the same effect as if you were to read it in the correct order. There is no set order. And that brings me on to my next point. I firmly believe that the presentation of a manga should reflect the narrative it is paired with. In all storytelling mediums, presentation and story are intrinsically connected. Presentation is a vehicle through which the contents of a story are delivered. Historical manga tend to lean towards more naturalistic art for their character designs, backgrounds, and scenery. Comedy manga tend to make use of abstract drawing techniques to accentuate the whimsical nature of their stories. Romance manga tend to combine naturalism and abstractism depending on their approach. Of course, there are exceptions, and there are no clear rules or guidelines to how a manga should be presented. It's different for every single case, but my main point is that presentation should work in conjunction with the story the manga is telling. For example, imagine the goofy adventure fantasy manga that is One Piece were to be drawn in a very detailed, naturalistic style like Vagabond, the historical manga. One Piece, a fantasy story about dreams and imagination in the style of Vagabond, a deeply personal work with strong themes of introspection and self-development. Do you see why that doesn't really work? And this argument is consolidated through Eiichiro Oda's drawing of Vagabond's protagonist, where he opts in for a slightly more naturalistic style as opposed to the style in which he draws One Piece. Presentation should underscore the story being told. A dark, horrific, and gory story like Berserk should be drawn to be exactly that, and the few and far between moments of hope, brightness, and sometimes even happiness should reflect that too. A good mangaka will adjust the way certain scenes are presented to reflect the tone and overall vibe of said scene. Manga is an incredibly diverse medium which allows for virtually any type of story to be presented in any type of way as long as it is composed as a sequence of panels combining drawings and text. And what are generally regarded as the two most important aspects of manga presentation are appropriateness and flow. Hunter x Hunter is an ever-changing story. There are tons of different plot lines woven together to tell this story about a boy searching for his father in a massive world. The world, much like our own, is massive and incredibly diverse. There are different cultures, societies, belief systems, occupations, lifestyles, and even economies. The physical structure is also very diverse, which has given us some gorgeous scenery and backgrounds throughout the story. And of course, with the main premise of this manga being a child's pursuit of his father in such a massive world, the narrative itself is also incredibly diverse. Just look at the premise of each arc. We start with an exam tournament and rescue arc, then a battle tournament, then an RPG isekai, then the Chimera Ant arc, which is so incredibly diverse in of itself I struggle to boil it down to a single phrase, then a political election arc, and now a war for royal succession, among various other equally important plotlines. And as a result of this, the idea of appropriate presentation is an interesting one with Hunter x Hunter. In order to reflect the different themes and subplots through the artwork, the presentation is dynamic and, like the story, ever-changing. I've often heard people call Hunter x Hunter's artwork inconsistent, and in terms of quality there's a reasonable argument for that which we'll dive into later in the video. But in terms of style, and just Togashi's overall approach at presentation, it is definitely inconsistent, but not in a bad way at all. Inconsistency is usually stated in a derogatory way, but with Hunter x Hunter the evolution of the narrative demands changes in presentation. The Chimera Ant arc is the perfect example of this. Togashi began to use brushwork far more than he has at any other point in the story to emphasize the character's emotions and accentuate the dark, horrifying tone of the narrative. Yorknew is supposed to feel like a crime noir thriller, very fast-paced, high-intensity, and incredibly suspenseful from start to finish. The nighttime setting and constant use of dark, gothic backgrounds, as well as thicker brushstrokes, supplements that tone. Greed Island is based off of role-playing games and the isekai genre in general, and you can really see this in the artwork. The backgrounds and overall setting obviously feels like something out of a game, and the usage of spell cards which are explained to us in charts at the end of almost every chapter reflects that too. This same idea applies to almost every other arc. The Succession War has probably the most sleek and refined artwork in the series, as it's about a royal family. It's also incredibly wordy, with pages and pages of conversation and monologue, which might not be something everybody likes, but definitely fits the strong political backbone of this narrative. It's essentially a huge mind game consisting of thousands of players on a single ship, many of which are trying to kill one another without being noticed. Every arc is fundamentally very, very different, and so Togashi's dynamic style is incredibly appropriate. People really underappreciate the importance of paneling and page layouts. As I previously explained, it's arguably the single most important aspect of manga art, considering the medium is defined by stories that combine text and visuals in a sequence of panels. Togashi is an absolute master of paneling. He consistently creates focal points by overlapping panels with the main point of interest, allowing for very cool looking pages that flow incredibly well. This is possible due to his deep understanding of hierarchy in art. It may seem like quite a simple thing, but knowing how to visually communicate the importance of your panels through shapes and sizes is a strong sign of a brilliant mangaka. The reader subconsciously understands that this thing, which has been given the most space, focus and spotlight on the page, is the most important thing. And the fact that this is a subconscious understanding that they don't need to dwell on strengthens the flow of the read. Togashi's paneling can be incredibly creative too, with pages like this, and this. Notice how easy it is to read despite how much action is taking place. It's truly astonishing that this is a common, effortless occurrence in the Hunter x Hunter manga. And I must say, it's quite hard to analyze something like paneling and put it into words because this aspect of presentation really hinges upon your experience. Good paneling is one of those things you don't notice when done well. You only really notice the importance of paneling when it's done poorly and there is no real flow in the sequence. And that's why it's so easy to miss, despite being one of the most essential aspects of manga presentation. Hunter x Hunter is an incredibly engaging and immersive reading experience. The battle between Hisoka and Chrollo is one of the prime examples of this. Togashi makes a bunch of unique panel choices and framings that make it impossible to stop reading. His paneling is on another level. He has this uncanny ability of including so many things on a single page without it ever feeling cluttered or confusing to read through. Every page has a distinct reading order that makes it one of the smoothest reads I've ever come across, and that's certainly the main reason I consider Hunter x Hunter to be one of the most impressively made manga I've ever read. To me, paneling and page layouts are the most important thing in manga presentation, and Togashi might just be the best I've seen in that regard. A good character design, and this is really oversimplified, is essentially a visual representation of the character that is suitable given their various traits, beliefs, and motivations. All of the different visual components of a character working in tandem to create meaning is the essence of a good character design. When I think of my absolute favourite character design, I think of Guts, the Dragon Slayer and its countless nicks and blemishes, his body covered with scars and wounds which is usually hidden by the epic berserker armor he wears, the white patch in his hair, an unexpected detail for such a young man but an incredibly fitting one, his aggressive facial expressions, his spiky hair. We can be here for days. All of these different aspects work together to define Guts as this angry, hateful man who has seen all the horrors the world has to offer at the start of the story. But as the manga progresses, Guts does too, and his design reflects that. It's the perfect balance of subtle but informative. You can't know everything about Guts just based off of his design, but it is intentionally constructed for you to feel a certain way about him. But once the layers are all peeled back, you gain a new sense of appreciation for the design, which serves as this facade he purposefully wears to shield himself from the pain he suffers from, and keep moving forward on his never-ending struggle against fate. And on top of that, it's just so damn raw. One look at this guy, and you know he's something special. Like Miura, Togashi has also mastered this balance that every good character design needs. If it's too subtle, then it doesn't really accomplish its job, but if it's too informative, it can come across as obnoxiously obvious. Gon's character design is a great example of this. He rarely changes his outfit, which highlights his focus on the pursuit of his dream. He's a boy on a mission with a precise goal he is working towards. The green color palette represents his relationship with nature. He gets along well with animals and he was raised in a forest. It also ties into the fact that Hunter x Hunter is ultimately the coming of age story of Gon, and green is the color of growth. Killua's design heavily contrasts Gon's. He's always changing his outfit because he doesn't really know what he wants. He's aimless, with no grand ambitions, and just wants to accompany Gon on his journey. Going back to his original outfit in the election arc when parting ways with Gon is a fantastic way of utilizing design for characterization. The purple color palette is iconic to the Zoldyck family, and of course his white hair. This is one of my favourite pieces of Togashi's subtlety in character design. Out of all the Zoldyck heirs, Killua is the golden child. He's the one his parents have most hope for, and this is embodied through the white hair. All of his siblings have black hair, which starkly contrasts with the white hair of Silver and Zeno, the current and previous patriarchs of the family, making the reader visually aware of his importance to the family. Leorio's casual and regular design is very fitting for what might be the only normal character in this entire series. Not much more to say for him because it really is that simple and still so effective. Kurapika's design is one of the best in the series. He uses chains for his Nen ability, which represents how he feels shackled to his mission. His scarlet eyes activate when he's feeling strong emotions. His outfits evolve over the course of the series, going from the exclusive Kurta clan outfit to the feminine design in Yorknu to a suit and tie as a bodyguard for the Mafia. There's genuinely so much to unpack for this design, I don't know where to begin. Hisoka's design is another great one. One look at him and you know he's supposed to resemble a jester, which ties into his mysterious disposition. What does Hisoka want? It's hard to say, he's quite the enigma. He's a tough nut to crack, but what I found most impressive about his design is the use of cards. Hisoka is a magician who uses cards for his Nen abilities. His speech bubbles are often decorated with the different card symbols: spades, diamonds, clubs, and hearts. They're used as tone indicators, which Togashi provides the audience with as a way to discern the intentions behind his statements. My good friend made a fantastic thread analysing the character of Hisoka. The implementation of card symbols is a massive aspect of that analysis, so I'll leave a link to that in the description for those who are interested. I highly suggest you go and read it because it's great, it's really great. And lastly, Chrollo Lucifer, whose design is undoubtedly my favourite in the entire series. It is packed with so much symbolism that goes a very long way into implicitly characterising him. His forehead tattoo is some sort of Christian symbolism, a cross which represents the crucifixion of Jesus, but his surname is Lucifer, inspired by the Christian belief of Lucifer, the fallen angel who is now believed to be the devil. The inverted cross on the back of his coat in Yorknu can be interpreted in two ways. Either it's the St. Peter's cross, a symbol of humility, or it's a reverse cross, a symbol of Satanism. His design in Heaven's Arena in his fight against Hisoka is the most over-the-top example of this, where his outfit is covered in inverted crosses. He holds his book like a Bible, and it also characterizes his lack of identity. His ability Skill Hunter quite literally allows him to steal other people's Nen abilities, and with the inherent relationship between Nen abilities and the user's personality, this small detail says so much about him. With the most recent context of his backstory, we know that he picks up languages very easily, and at the beginning of his journey he chose to play the role of a villain in the world, a necessary evil for the greater good, which could explain all the inverted crosses we see on his different outfits. However, like Kurapika, there's just far too much to unpack here, and I'd be lying if I said I completely understood every element of Chrollo's character design. There are a lot of cool, smaller examples too, like the scars on the faces of the mob bosses distinguishing them as illegitimate members of the Kakin royal family. There are so many of these examples, you could genuinely make a series of videos just discussing Hunter x Hunter character designs. But to end this section of the video, one of my favourite little details is how Gon loses the glint in his eyes in the Chimera Ant arc, as he is completely consumed by darkness. A common critique of Hunter x Hunter's artwork is that the manga looks bland and monotonous due to the lack of backgrounds and most pages either being predominantly black or white. As previously explained, I don't think this is always the case because of how dynamic the artwork is from one story arc to the next. However, even when it is the case, I believe this to be a very fitting stylistic decision. Whenever this topic of minimalism in manga art comes up, I like to refer to this 2013 interview from Taito Kubo. Kubo was asked by the interviewer, "Many readers are wondering why you tend to draw minimalistic to no backgrounds and focus on the characters instead." To which he responded, "Backgrounds distract the reader from what's going on inside the character. Whenever I leave backgrounds out, it's to allow my readers to see the heart of the character." It all boils down to that point of appropriateness. If you're drawing a high fantasy story that hinges upon its amazing world and adventure like One Piece, then yeah, backgrounds are incredibly important. But in a story like Bleach, which hinges upon the philosophies of its characters and exploring their mental states, backgrounds aren't really necessary. In these cases, you want all the focus to be on the character. And then we have the interesting case of Hunter x Hunter, which is both of those things but hinges on neither of them. It is a fantasy story with an incredible world, and it does spend a bulk of its time exploring the psychology of its cast members. It's both of those things and many more things, and to account for that, Togashi adjusts his presentation accordingly. The highlight, the focal point of interest, is very obvious on almost every single page. When Togashi wants to drive home the adventure fantasy aspects of this story, we get a fantastic implementation of backgrounds, like here, 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 and here. But when he wants to dive deeply into the minds of his characters, we get minimalistic pages like this one, and this one. And then there are pages that blend both of those things, with a brilliant background accompanying a monologue, like this iconic spread of Kurapika surrounded by the Kurta eyes. It's perfectly fair to prefer manga that go out of their way to create unique environments for the backgrounds of their pages. When it's done right, it can provide a lot of depth to the page and look incredibly good. But it's not a necessity, and not all manga are the same. With that being said though, enough about backgrounds. What I really want to talk about in this section is the different aspects of Togashi's drawings and the techniques he implements to enhance his artwork. Togashi opts for brushes to display intense emotions as well as for graphic scenes, which is why it is used far more in the Chimera Ant arc than any other portion of the story. The thick brushwork has led to some of my absolute favourite panels in the entire medium, one of which being the thumbnail for this video. Incredibly evocative pieces of art that communicate the tone, atmosphere, and emotions of the characters involved in the scene fantastically. He makes brilliant use of speed lines to accentuate the impact behind slams, clashes, punches, and other points of contact. He utilizes screen tone instead of traditionally drawn backgrounds. There's a huge variety of textures and shades that Togashi uses as an alternative to hatching. And on that note, Togashi's hatching is some of my absolute favourites in the medium. Just look at this panel of Hisoka. You cannot tell me that this isn't a fantastic depiction of his malice. Or this page preceding Netero's death. Look at the line work on and surrounding the skull in the background. Such a vivid and haunting illustration that accompanies this incredible quote, which honestly might not have been as good if not for the artwork alongside it. Togashi is also an expert of symmetry in his double spreads. This spread, and this spread are some of my favourite examples. Of course, I also have to briefly mention Togashi's creative typesetting. This is one of my favourite spreads of all time, and people always laugh at me when I say that, but I genuinely believe it is a perfect creative decision. Gon is mentally shattered. He is overwhelmed by a flurry of thoughts and emotions upon hearing Kite is beyond saving. He is consumed by guilt, anger, and grief, and that is all perfectly captured in a chaotic mess of monologue covering the entire spread. These examples I'm sharing are just a handful of what this manga has to offer, and there's no better way to properly comprehend Togashi's brilliance than reading the manga and seeing for yourself, which I highly suggest to everybody. As brilliant as Madhouse's adaptation is, I genuinely prefer the manga as a whole. As you probably already know, Togashi has a debilitating back problem. It's so severe at the moment that he has to lay down whilst drawing. I've probably mentioned this in over 3 videos already, but it's a serious problem that has plagued the series for years now, resulting in Togashi almost spending as much time on hiatus as he has releasing chapters. It's a huge shame, and could happen to any mangaka when you see how terrible their working conditions are. But at the end of the day, it is what it is, and it has definitely seeped into his work on many occasions. However, and this is a big however, Togashi has made an effort of patching up all of the issues and making it look as good as possible for the volume release. Here are just a few examples of the magazine release versus the volume release. As you can see, the difference is absolutely huge. But then we have chapter 337. This is definitely the worst drawn chapter in the entire series, and I don't think anybody would disagree on that. But what's really interesting about it is that Togashi didn't patch this up for the volume release. He was on a 30 chapter streak for the election arc, and you can really see that affecting his artwork in the later portions of the arc. However, 337 is on another level entirely. And sure, Togashi could have just not had the time or energy to patch it up for the volume release, but I'm inclined to believe this was a stylistic decision. I actually made a tweet about this yesterday, asking people if they think the weaker art in 337 was exclusively because of his health, or he chose to draw it in that style for another purpose. And I got a beautiful response from my good friend T. Maybe Togashi didn't want to redraw this chapter because of how the content relates to his mental state and struggles of drawing at the time, especially given Koala's words. "I'll live through the suffering. When I die, I want to feel like I did my best." The cartoonish style that looks like it could have been drawn by children also fits the context of the chapter, with us finally seeing Gon return to innocence after over 100 chapters of him being consumed by darkness. I really don't think 337 looks the way it does even in the volume release, just because of Togashi's health issues. Yes, they were a big part, but not the decisive factor in him having released this chapter looking the way it did. 338 had a spread that also looks pretty poorly drawn, but beyond that, it looks pretty standard for Hunter x Hunter, and 339 has some of my favourite pages in the series. One thing about Togashi's artwork that is very consistent is his gradual improvements over the course of the series. There is obviously hiccups along the way that can be attributed to his health problems, but generally speaking, every arc looks better than the last, with the only real exception being the election arc. But as it stands right now, the Succession War has some of the most gorgeous artwork of the entire series. It hasn't reached the peaks of Chimera Ant, of course, but that's because the narrative itself hasn't demanded that sort of artwork. When the climax of this current arc comes, I do believe we will see Togashi's best artwork of the entire series. And that brings me to my final points of this video, the main thing that triggered me to make this video to begin with. The abundance of words in the Succession War. There are so many pages that take literally multiple minutes to read through because of how much text there is, and this is a huge turnoff for a lot of people. Many think this kind of storyline would be better suited to a novel, and I honestly couldn't disagree more. The beauty of manga is that this medium allows for virtually any type of story as long as it is composed in a sequence of panels combining drawings with text. The Succession War is narratively geared towards a lot of dialogue and monologue. I mean, just look at the premise of this arc. This is a voyage on the Black Whale towards the new continent with 200,000 people aboard the ship, which includes the King of the Kakin Empire and his 14 princes, all battling for the succession of the throne. There are several mafia families, the Zodiacs, the Phantom Troop, Hisoka, Beyond, a court of justice, literally hundreds of bodyguards dedicated to the princes, a military, general passengers in the lower tiers, members of the Hunter Association. There is so much going on here, and they simply cannot afford to engage in direct combat. Everything has to be done secretively. They can't be noticed trying to kill one another and have to maintain friendly relationships despite engaging in active war. The arc has a very strong political backbone, and politics is comprised of talking 99% of the time. So bringing it back to the point of appropriateness, there is truly no better way to present this kind of narrative than all these intricate plots that Togashi has been given us, packed with a lot of words. And as far as that goes, I honestly believe we're witnessing a ticking time bomb that will erupt on the ship. Once the climax begins, there won't be so much dialogue. There will be non-stop action and a bloodbath as a result of that. We are currently reading the calm before the storm, and so I do think all the concerns regarding the dialogue will be short-lived, and looking back on all of this on a binge read once the arc is completed will be a much more satisfying experience for many. We're still in the setup phase, guys, and setup is generally very wordy. I have personally been loving it though, because more text means longer chapters, and hey, who's complaining about more Hunter x Hunter? And with that being said, I hope I've been able to explain why I believe Hunter x Hunter has such terrific artwork, and really change the way you perceive Togashi's presentative skills if you didn't already like the art. Thank you very much for watching, and have a fantastic day.